In a kingdom where the drums once sang the name of a beloved prince, silence now reigns. For the prince who was born to lead has lost his way, and somewhere between pride and pain, his soul wanders, searching for the road back home. In a kingdom where the sun kissed the golden roofs and the drums spoke the language of joy, a child was born, a prince who was loved by all. His name was Prince Adrian, the only son of King Darrell and Queen Miriam. The people of Eloria called him the heart of the kingdom, for wherever he went, laughter followed. From childhood, Adrian was taught the ways of a ruler, wisdom, patience, and compassion. But with every lesson came praise, and with every praise came pride. Soon, the humble boy who once played among the people began to believe that he was above them. When he walked through the village, he no longer smiled at the children who waved. When the old bowed before him, he saw not respect, but power. Queen Miriam often warned him, "My son, a crown is not worn on the head alone. It must rest in the heart." But Adrian would laugh softly and say, "Mother, what is a king without pride?" And that pride, like a seed watered by flattery, grew deep roots. As the years passed, King Darrell grew old, and the day came when he said, "My son, it is time for you to lead." The drums beat across Eloria. The people cheered. The young prince was crowned amidst songs of joy. But pride is a silent thief. It steals love before you see it go. When the council advised him, Adrian dismissed their words. When the farmers begged for help during the drought, he ignored them. When the people whispered about their suffering, he silenced them with guards. The once joyful kingdom turned cold. The laughter that once filled the air was replaced by fear. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Queen Miriam came to her son. Her eyes were heavy with sorrow. "Adrian," she whispered, "you have forgotten who you are. The throne is not your master, it is your burden. Come back to the heart that made you prince." But the prince turned away. "Mother," he said, "you speak like the villagers. I am king now. My heart belongs to power." Tears fell from her eyes, and with a trembling voice she said, "Then power will be your only companion." That night, a great storm rose over Eloria. Lightning tore the skies, and thunder shook the palace. By morning, the river that guarded the kingdom overflowed, washing away homes and crops. The people cried for help, but their king sat on his golden throne, unmoved. And so began the fall of the prince who forgot his name. Because when a man loses humility, he forgets the voice of his own heart. When a king turns his back on his people, even the wind refuses to carry his name. The storm had ended, but the peace in Eloria was gone. Fields lay in ruin. The river had swallowed homes, and hunger began to whisper through every hut. The people waited for their king to act, but King Adrian only saw their suffering as weakness. "The strong must rise," he said coldly. "Let those who are worthy survive." His words spread like fire through dry grass. The council of elders, once his loyal advisers, exchanged worried glances. Among them was Elder Thomas, the oldest voice in the land. "My king," Thomas said gently, "the crown does not make a man strong. His kindness does. If your people fall, your throne will crumble beneath you." But Adrian's pride had deafened his heart. He rose from his seat and pointed at the old man. "Leave my sight, elder. I will not be lectured by age that has lost its courage." The court fell silent. The once loved prince had become a stranger. Days turned to weeks. Thieves began to steal from the royal storehouse. Soldiers turned against each other. Families fled to the mountains, seeking food and safety. And one night, the palace gates burst open. The guards, unpaid and hungry, allowed the rebels in. Flames climbed the palace walls as angry villagers shouted, "The king has forgotten us!" Adrian ran through the corridors, his golden robe dragging behind him, his crown slipping from his head. The air was filled with smoke and screams. "Protect the king," someone cried, but no one came. When he reached the throne room, he found his mother standing there, calm, dressed in white as if waiting for fate. "Mother, we must escape," he shouted, grabbing her hand. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Escape from what, my son? From your own choices?" A loud crash echoed. Part of the ceiling collapsed. The queen stumbled, and Adrian caught her in his arms. "Please," he whispered, "don't leave me." She smiled faintly. "I have always been here, Adrian. But you left long ago." The soldiers dragged him away as the palace burned. Outside, the people watched their kingdom fall, not with joy, but with sorrow. For even in their anger, they remembered the boy who once laughed with them in the marketplace. By dawn, the Golden Palace was nothing but smoke and ash. The king's banner lay torn in the dust. Far from the ruins, Adrian rode alone on a wounded horse. His robe was torn, his crown lost. For the first time, he saw the world without the glow of power. He was no longer a king, only a man running from his pride. As the morning sun rose behind him, the prince whispered to himself, "If a crown can burn, then what truly makes a king?" And the road ahead was long, silent, and waiting. When the crown falls, the man beneath it must learn to walk with bare feet. For the first time in his life, Prince Adrian had no guards, no gold, and no throne. The road stretched endlessly before him, covered in dust and silence. The sun was harsh, and hunger became his new companion. He rode until his horse collapsed from exhaustion. He fell to his knees beside it, whispering, "Even you have left me." His voice cracked. The voice of a king now sounded like that of a beggar. For days, he wandered through forests and dry fields. He knocked on the doors of strangers, but none recognized him. Some gave him scraps of food, others closed their doors. One evening he found himself in a small village by the river, the same river that once brought wealth to Eloria. Now it flowed quietly, as if mourning the kingdom's fall. There he met a woman named Grace, a widow who lived with her young son, Eli. She saw the tired man sitting by her gate and asked gently, "Traveler, have you lost your way?" Adrian nodded, his eyes lowered. "I have lost more than my way, ma'am. I have lost myself." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then said, "A man is never truly lost if he can still speak the truth." She gave him food and a place to rest. In the following days, Adrian helped her fetch water, repair the roof, and tend to the small farm. He worked with his hands, hands that once held a scepter. At first, he struggled. The work was hard, the sun unforgiving. But slowly, something inside him began to soften. Each evening, he sat by the fire with Grace and her son. Eli would ask him, "Sir, were you ever a king?" Adrian would smile faintly. "Once I thought I was, but a king without kindness is just a man in a costume." Grace often spoke of faith, humility, and forgiveness. "Life humbles those it loves," she said one night, "so they may find the strength they never knew they had." Her words echoed in his heart like gentle rain on dry land. As the moon rose, Adrian looked toward the north, where his ruined kingdom lay beyond the hills. For the first time, he did not feel anger or pride. He felt longing and remorse. He whispered into the night, "If my people still live, may they forgive me. If my crown still stands, may it belong to one who loves." The wind carried his words away, soft as a prayer, and though he did not know it, the path of his redemption had just begun. The past is a shadow that walks beside every man, no matter how far he runs. Weeks passed peacefully in the small riverside village. Prince Adrian, once the ruler of a great kingdom, now lived like a simple man. He worked with grace in the fields, helped villagers repair fences, and taught little Eli how to read. For the first time, he felt the quiet joy of being ordinary. Each sunrise brought new strength. Each sunset brought a little peace. But peace, like the river, carries memories in its current. One evening, as Adrian fetched water from the stream, he heard two travelers whispering nearby. "Have you heard?" one said. "The kingdom of Eloria is ruled by soldiers now. The king vanished like smoke, and his people live in fear." Adrian froze. His heart tightened. Another voice replied, "They say the gods curse the king for his pride. Some believe he still walks the earth, a beggar, lost to shame." He lowered the water pot and stared at his reflection in the river. The words cut deep. He had tried to forget who he was, but the past had found him again. That night, he sat outside, staring into the fire. Grace noticed his silence. "What troubles you, Adrian?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then spoke. "There was once a king," he began, "who had everything: love, land, and loyalty. But his heart became too proud, and he lost it all. Now he lives with the weight of what he destroyed." Grace looked at him knowingly. "And what does this king seek now?" Adrian's voice trembled. "Forgiveness, though I fear he doesn't deserve it." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "No one earns forgiveness, my friend. It is a gift. The humble receive it, the proud reject it." Her words warmed him like sunlight. But before he could reply, a loud shout came from the edge of the village. "Bandits! Bandits by the river!" Men carrying torches stormed into the village. They stole food, burned huts, and dragged people away. Adrian's old instincts awoke. He grabbed a wooden staff and ran toward the chaos. "Leave them!" he shouted. One of the bandits turned, sneering. "Who are you to command us?" Adrian stood tall, eyes burning with courage. A man who once forgot his people and will not do so again. He fought fiercely, defending Grace and Eli. The villagers joined him, and soon the bandits fled into the darkness. When it was over, the people gathered around him, trembling but grateful. Eli ran to him, crying, "You saved us." Adrian smiled faintly, blood on his lip, dust on his robe. "No, Eli. We saved each other." Grace looked at him with quiet pride. The heart of a true king does not live in a palace. It lives where courage meets compassion. As dawn broke, the smoke from the fires rose into a pink sky. Adrian watched it drift toward the horizon, toward the kingdom he had lost. And deep within, he knew, the time is coming when I must face what I left behind. No man truly finds peace until he faces the road he once feared to walk. The morning came with a quiet heaviness. The air was cool, the river calm, and yet within Adrian's heart, a storm raged. He had fought, healed, and learned, but now the whispers of destiny called him back to the kingdom he once abandoned. He stood on the hill overlooking the village, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke, reminders of the life he'd lived and the life he had lost. Grace approached, her steps soft on the grass. "You are leaving," she said, not as a question, but as something she already knew. Adrian nodded slowly. "I must go home, Grace. I must face what I destroyed. My people suffer because of my pride. I cannot hide while they bleed." She looked at him with sadness and strength. "Then go, Prince Adrian, but remember what you have learned here. Power means nothing without compassion." Eli ran to him, tears in his eyes. "Will you come back?" Adrian knelt and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "If the gods will it, yes. But even if I do not, remember this: courage begins when fear ends." The boy hugged him tightly, and Grace handed him a small leather pouch. "For your journey," she said. Inside were dried fruits, a water skin, and a wooden charm carved in the shape of a dove. He smiled faintly. "You've given me more than food, Grace. You've given me hope." As he turned to leave, the villagers gathered, watching the stranger who had once been a prince walk toward an uncertain fate. The old women whispered prayers, the men bowed their heads, and the children waved silently. The path home was long and cruel. The forests whispered his name. The mountains tested his strength, and the rivers reflected his regret. He passed through villages ruined by war. Soldiers ruled them now, cruel and hungry for power. He saw children begging, elders dying, and once loyal guards now turned to thieves. Each sight struck him like a blade. He remembered his throne, his arrogance, his last words to his father: "I need no counsel. I am king." Now, those words echoed in every empty street he passed. One night, as rain poured heavily, Adrian sought shelter under a broken bridge. He lit a small fire and held the wooden dove in his hand. Tears mixed with the rain as he whispered, "Father, if you still live, forgive me. And if you're gone, let me make right what I destroyed." Thunder roared above him, as if the heavens themselves were answering his cry. At dawn, he rose, soaked but determined. The castle walls of Eloria stood in the far distance, tall, dark, and silent. Smoke curled from the towers, and banners of the warlords hung where royal flags once flew. He clenched his fist. "This is my doing," he murmured, "and this is where I will begin again." With each step, he felt the weight of his past lift slightly, not because it was gone, but because he had chosen to carry it with courage. As he reached the gates of the fallen kingdom, the guards shouted, "Who dares approach the castle?" Adrian raised his head, soaked, scarred, but unbroken. "A man who once was king," he said, "and now seeks to serve." The gates slowly opened, and destiny awaited him beyond. When pride builds a throne, darkness becomes its crown. The great gates of Eloria creaked open slowly, their rusted hinges crying like forgotten ghosts. Prince Adrian stepped inside, though he no longer felt like a prince. The once majestic streets were now ruins of what had been. Market stalls lay broken, fountains dry, and children wandered barefoot with hollow eyes. Where laughter once echoed, silence reigned. At the center of the city stood the palace, his father's palace, but its beauty was gone. Soldiers of the warlord who ruled now patrolled the gates. Their armor was crude, their faces cruel. One guard sneered, "Who are you, stranger, to walk here so boldly?" Adrian lowered his head. I am but a traveler seeking to serve." They laughed. "Serve? Then clean the stables, old fool." They shoved him toward the lower courtyards. He stumbled, but did not resist. For days, Adrian worked among servants who never recognized him, scrubbing floors, fetching water, and carrying wood. At night, he slept in the servants' quarters, his back aching, but his spirit alive. He listened. He watched, and slowly he began to see how deep the rot had grown. The new ruler, Lord Malbec, sat upon the throne that once belonged to Adrian's family. He ruled with greed and fear, taxing the poor, silencing the wise, and crushing those who spoke of the old king. One evening, as Adrian scrubbed the palace floors, he overheard two guards talking. "The warlord plans to burn the last of the royal archives tonight," one said. "The people are restless. He wants to erase the old name." Forever, Adrian froze. The archives held the history of Eloria, the stories of his ancestors, the wisdom of his father, and the laws that once protected the weak. He could not allow it. Not again. That night, under the cover of darkness, he crept through the old corridors he once knew as a child. Dust and cobwebs coated the walls, but his heart remembered every turn. When he reached the Hall of Records, the torches were already lit. Soldiers carried scrolls and books, throwing them into a great fire. Adrian's chest burned with rage, not for himself, but for his people. He grabbed a bucket of water and dashed it onto the flames. The soldiers turned sharply. "Who dares?" Adrian stood tall, his face lit by the dying fire. "A son of Eloria," he said, "and its true heir." The soldiers lunged, but he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Years of humility had made him strong, in ways pride never could. He was struck down, beaten, and dragged before Lord Malbec. The warlord looked down from the throne, the same throne Adrian once sat upon. "So," Malbec sneered, "the fallen prince returns. Tell me, why crawl back to the seat you abandoned?" Adrian raised his bruised face. "Not to rule," he whispered. "To restore what should never have been lost. Honor." Malbec laughed darkly. "Honor does not feed men." Adrian met his eyes. "No, but it feeds their souls." A heavy silence followed. Even the guards paused. Malvec's smirk faded. "You are a fool," he said coldly, "and fools die forgotten." He motioned to the guards. "Throw him in the dungeon." As they dragged him away, Adrian whispered to himself, "Even in darkness, the flame of truth must burn." And deep in the shadows of the palace, a few old servants began to whisper, "The prince has returned." Even in the deepest darkness, a single flame can awaken 1,000 hearts. The dungeon was cold and damp. Chains clinked softly with every breath Prince Adrian took. Days turned into nights, and nights into whispers of despair. He had no bed, only stone beneath him. No crown, only scars upon his hands. But within his chest, something refused to die. He would close his eyes and see the faces of his people, the hungry, the hopeless, the lost. And every time he saw them, a fire stirred inside him. One night, as rain drummed softly above the dungeon roof, a faint voice called out from the darkness. "Who are you?" a prisoner asked weakly. Adrian hesitated, then whispered, "A man who once had everything and lost it to pride." The man coughed. "Then you are like us. What keeps you breathing?" Adrian stared at the small flame of a torch far down the corridor. "Hope," he said simply. "Hope that one day, Even a broken man can make things right. The words spread through the cells like light spreading through cracks in stone. Soon, the prisoners began to whisper stories to each other, stories of courage, of faith, of the old king's kindness. They did not know the man who spoke to them was the prince himself, but they felt his spirit, calm, humble, strong. One evening, a young guard named Taran came to bring water. He was barely older than a boy, his face tired from serving a cruel master. Adrian looked at him and said softly, "Do you know why your king burns books?" The boy frowned. "He says the past is weakness." Adrian smiled sadly. "No, the past is wisdom. A tree that forgets its roots will fall in the storm." Those words lingered in the boy's heart. From that day, Taran began to secretly pass food to the prisoners and carried messages to the servants above. The whispers grew louder. The old ways will rise again. The true prince lives in the shadows. Adrian began to teach the prisoners small lessons of unity. How to listen, how to wait, how to believe. He told them, freedom begins not with swords, but with faith. Weeks passed. The dungeon, once silent, now glowed with quiet hope. Even the guards noticed something strange. The prisoners no longer fought or cried. They prayed, planned, and waited. Then, one stormy night, lightning struck the palace roof. The noise was deafening, and chaos spread. Taran rushed to Adrian's cell, trembling. "My lord," he whispered, "the guards are distracted. If you wish to escape, now is the time." Adrian stood slowly, his eyes fierce but calm. "No, Taran, I will not run. I will rise when my people are ready." Not before. Taran nodded, tears in his eyes. "Then tell me what to do." Adrian stepped closer, his voice steady. "Carry this truth to those above. The prince has returned, and he remembers them all." As Taran fled into the storm, thunder rolled like the drums of destiny. Adrian closed his eyes, whispering, "A kingdom is not built by kings alone, but by every heart that dares to hope." And for the first time in years, the dungeon no longer felt dark. It glowed, not with fire, but with faith. When one light shines in the dark, even the lost will find their way home. Days turned into weeks within the cold walls of the dungeon. The torches flickered and died, but inside Prince Adrian's heart, a new fire had begun to burn. Each morning, he spoke to the prisoners. Not as a king, but as a brother. He shared his food with the weakest, listened to their stories, and reminded them that life, though cruel, still had meaning. "A crown can be taken," he told them one night, "but courage belongs to no man but yourself." The guard Taran, once hardened by duty, began to see him differently. He brought Adrian extra bread, a little water, and whispered, "They call you the fallen prince. But in here, you've become something greater." The prisoners began to chant quietly when he walked past, the light in the dark. It was small, but it was hope, something they hadn't felt in years. Then, one fateful night, a storm raged above the city. Thunder shook the walls, and lightning flashed through the cracks. Through the noise, Adrian heard footsteps, not the heavy ones of guards, but the careful steps of a woman. It was Grace, the widow who had once given him shelter. Disguised as a servant, she slipped through the corridor with Taran's help. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw him. "Adrian," she whispered, "the people still remember you. The kingdom bleeds under the new ruler's greed. You must return." He looked down at his chains and smiled faintly. I cannot return as a king. Only as a servant who understands his people's pain. Grace stepped closer. Then return as both, the servant and the king. That night, with Taran's help, Adrian escaped through the old tunnels beneath the prison. Rain poured over him as he crawled through the mud and out into the open field. The air smelled of freedom and thunder. When he stood under the open sky, lightning flashing across his face, his chains still hanging from his wrists, Adrian whispered a vow. I left my kingdom in pride. Now I return in humility. I will not rule by fear, but by love. The wind howled as if answering his words. Behind him, the dungeon burned, a symbol that the age of darkness was ending. As dawn broke, the first light touched the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, the bells of Eloria rang once more. The lost prince had risen, not as a ruler, but as a beacon for the forgotten. The road of redemption is walked with wounded feet, but it leads to peace. The dawn, after Adrian's escape, painted the sky with fire. The land stretched endlessly, golden grass, singing birds, and the smell of rain still in the air. Every step he took was heavy, but it was his heart that carried the greatest weight. Beside him walked Taran, the young guard who had risked his life to free him. Behind them trailed Grace, her cloak torn, her spirit unbroken. They were outlaws now, hunted by the same kingdom they longed to save. They traveled by night, hiding by day. Across rivers, through forests, and over dry hills, the journey back to Eloria became more than a mission. It was a pilgrimage of the soul. At night, as they rested by the fire, Adrian often looked into the flames and whispered, I once had everything, yet I was empty. Now I have nothing, yet I feel alive. Grace smiled softly. Sometimes the ashes must fall before the seed can grow. But their peace did not last. One night, deep within the forest, they heard horses. The royal patrol. Taran's face turned pale. They've tracked us, he said. Adrian stood, his heart pounding. We must not fight them. We must show them truth. Yet before he could speak, a voice rang through the night. It was General Rowan, his father's most loyal soldier, now serving the corrupt new ruler. Prince Adrian, Rowan shouted, you have been declared a traitor. Surrender now or face judgment. Adrian stepped into the moonlight, his chains still hanging loosely from his wrists. I do not fear judgment, he said, for I have already faced it within myself. Rowan's sword trembled. He had once carried the young prince on his shoulders as a child. Adrian, he said softly, you should not have returned. I returned, the prince replied, because a kingdom without mercy is already lost. Before Rowan could answer, Taran stepped forward, shielding the prince. Then, you will have to go through me, he said firmly. The battle was fierce and short. Taran fought bravely, but fell to his knees, wounded. Rowan lowered his blade, tears in his eyes. Run, he whispered to Adrian. If you still love this land, live for it. Adrian hesitated, grief tearing through his chest, but Grace pulled him away, shouting, There's no time. As dawn broke, they stood upon a hill overlooking Eloria. The kingdom shimmered in the distance, its golden towers scarred by smoke and neglect. Adrian's eyes filled with both pain and hope. Home, he whispered, but not as I left it. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let us rebuild it, one heart at a time. The prince took a deep breath, the wind carrying the scent of earth and memory. His journey was not over. The true battle, the battle for his people's soul, was just beginning. When the heart returns home, it no longer seeks a throne, only peace. The city gates of Eloria stood tall before the rising sun, worn by time and battle. Once, they opened to the cheers of the people. Now, silence ruled the streets. Prince Adrian stood at the foot of those gates, his cloak soaked from rain, his eyes filled with both fear and longing. Beside him, Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I must be. The people deserve to see who I've become." They entered quietly, their footsteps echoing through the empty markets and broken fountains. The once bright city was covered in ash and dust. Hunger and fear walked openly in the faces of its people. Whispers followed him. That face, could it be him, the prince who left us, the one who brought ruin? He did not hide. He walked among them, head bowed, greeting the poor, the sick, the weary. To every person, he said only one thing: "I am sorry." At first, no one answered. Then an old woman dropped her basket and fell to her knees. "My son died fighting for your throne," she said through tears. "And yet, I see truth in your eyes. Maybe this time, Eloria has a king worth following." Her words spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. More people gathered, mothers, farmers, guards, children, all staring at the man who had once ruled from marble towers. Then came Lord Kael, the ruler who had taken the throne after Adrian's fall. He rode into the square on a black horse, his armor glinting under the morning sun. "Look who crawls back from the shadows," Kael sneered. "The prince who traded gold for mud." Adrian did not kneel, but neither did he raise his voice. "I came not to fight," he said, "but to heal what I broke." Kael laughed bitterly. "And what do you think these people need, your tears?" Adrian looked around him, at the hollow eyes, the broken homes, the forgotten dreams, and said softly, "No, they need hope, and I am willing to be the first to believe again." The crowd fell silent. Even Kael's men hesitated. The new ruler's face hardened. "Then die with your hope." He drew his sword and charged, but before he could strike, the people surged forward, unarmed but united. They surrounded Adrian, forming a wall of humanity between him and Kael. "No more blood," shouted the old woman. "No more kings without hearts," cried another. Kael's soldiers lowered their weapons. The people had spoken. Kael glared, his pride trembling. "This is not over." He turned and rode away, the sound of his horse fading into the distance. As sunlight broke through the clouds, Adrian fell to his knees in the square, tears mixing with rain. The people lifted their hands toward him, not to worship, but to forgive. "I am not your king," Adrian said through trembling lips. "I am your servant." And in that moment, the true crown returned, not to his head, but to his heart. The rain had stopped, leaving the city of Eloria draped in silence. The once proud walls glistened under the newborn sun, like tears drying after a long night of sorrow. Prince Adrian stood before the palace gates, his childhood home, now a shell of its former glory. He had returned as a servant, not a sovereign. The people followed him closely, not out of fear or command, but out of faith. For the first time, Eloria's heart beat again. As he stepped through the archway, memories clawed their way back. His father's laughter, his mother's songs, the council's cheers when he was crowned years ago. But the echo that greeted him now was empty, haunting. "Your Highness," Grace whispered beside him. "What will you do now?" Adrian turned, his gaze sweeping across the crowd that had once fled his arrogance. "We rebuild," he said softly. "But this time, we begin with the heart." He walked to the throne room, where the once golden seat of power stood dark and broken. The crown lay on the floor, half buried in ashes. Adrian picked it up carefully. It was heavy, cold, and burned his palm. He realized then the crown was not his to wear, not yet. That night, he gathered the people in the courtyard. Fires flickered around them, casting golden light on faces worn by struggle and survival. "I left you when you needed me most," Adrian began, voice trembling. "I sought glory in foreign lands and forgot that true greatness is found in serving others. But I have returned, not to rule, but to learn. Help me rebuild Eloria, not with gold, but with love." An old man stepped forward, leaning on his staff. "Words are wind, my prince. How do we trust the same hand that once turned away?" Adrian knelt before him. "You don't have to. Let my deeds speak instead." From that day, the prince labored among his people. He built homes with his hands, carried water, taught children, and tended the sick. The people watched in silence at first, then joined him one by one. Grace organized food for the widows. The soldiers guarded fields instead of gates. Slowly, laughter returned to the streets. Months passed. Where there had once been ruins, new gardens blossomed. The city of Eloria began to breathe again. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, the elders gathered before Adrian. The old man, who once doubted him, now smiled. "A true prince does not wear a crown of gold," he said, "but one of ashes, turned to grace." They placed the old crown before him, not on his head, but at his feet. And for the first time, Adrian understood. Leadership was not about being above others, but walking beside them. Power was not in the throne, but in compassion. As the wind swept across the square, carrying laughter and song, Grace whispered, "You have your kingdom again." Adrian smiled gently. "No," he said, "we have it together." And for the first time, Eloria's walls stood tall, not because of stone, but because of unity. The sun rose gently over Eloria that morning, painting the sky in soft gold and crimson. Birds sang again in the palace gardens, their songs blending with the laughter of children in the streets. The city that once wept now breathed with life. Prince Adrian stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, the same place he once gazed down with pride and arrogance. But today, his heart carried peace instead of ambition. His robe was simple, his crown still resting in the hall below, untouched. Grace approached quietly, her smile warm. "They are waiting for you," she said. Adrian turned, the morning light framing his face. "For me? For their king," she replied softly. He hesitated. "I am not sure I deserve that title anymore." Grace placed a hand on his chest. "Then wear it for them, not for yourself." As the palace drums sounded, the people gathered in the square. Thousands stood beneath banners of green and gold, their faces glowing with pride and gratitude. Elders, children, farmers, and soldiers, all united. When Adrian stepped out, the crowd bowed deeply. He raised a hand. "No," he said gently, "do not bow to me." The people lifted their heads in silence. I once thought a crown made me a king, Adrian began, but I was wrong. A true king is not the one who rules over others, but the one who serves them with love. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun touched the fields. Illoria does not belong to me. It belongs to every hand that built it, every heart that kept faith when I was lost. The old man, who once doubted him, stepped forward again. Then rule with wisdom, my son, for a kingdom led by humility shall never fall. Adrian smiled faintly, eyes glistening. He turned to Grace and whispered, "Will you stand beside me?" "Always," she said. Then, before the people, Adrian did something no ruler had ever done. He knelt. He bowed his head, not in shame, but in gratitude. The crowd gasped. And then, one by one, they knelt too. Not in submission, but in unity. The sound of drums softened into songs of joy. The sky seemed to open as sunlight poured over the city like a blessing. When Adrian rose, he did not place the crown on his head. Instead, he lifted it high and said, "This belongs to all of us. Together, we will keep Illoria strong." He erupted through the city. Bells rang, and children danced around him. Grace smiled through tears as Adrian placed the crown upon a carved wooden stand, a symbol, not a weapon. That night, Illoria glowed brighter than ever before. Fires burned across the hills, laughter echoed through the valley, and music filled the streets. In the quiet of his chamber, Adrian stood by the window, watching his people celebrate. "Father," he whispered to the stars, "I finally understand." He turned to Grace, who leaned against the doorway. "You've rebuilt more than a kingdom," she said. "You've rebuilt hearts." Adrian smiled. "So did you." She took his hand, and they walked together into the night, no longer prince and servant, but equals bound by purpose and love. And so the prodigal prince became the king who knelt, a ruler not of power, but of peace. Illoria would tell his story for generations to come. The prince who lost everything, and in losing, found what truly mattered. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.